Hi, everyone. Welcome to CKEditor's webinar on designing AI prompts for content creation, where we're going to learn about how to balance user needs with the UX experience itself. I have with me today Dan Wilson, who's our product marketing manager at CKEditor. How are you doing today, Dan?
Doing great. I love this topic and can't wait to share what we've learned.
Awesome. So let's get started. Today's webinar, what are we going to talk about? Well, we're going to first talk about like the 6 challenges we ran into while building generative AI into CKEditor with an LLM like OpenAI and how we overcame all of these challenges. We're also going to talk about the lessons that we learned that you can use when you start to add generative AI into your application. If this is your first time attending a CKEditor webinar or you're just wondering what CKEditor is, well, CKEditor is a rich text editor, JavaScript-based component that fits right into your web application. If you've used Drupal CMS, like the screenshot on this slide, you'll notice that CKEditor is built right into things like Drupal. And it's a really amazing rich text editor that can customize to your specific needs. And we've added an AI assistant that we believe will really help enhance your users' content creation and creativity process. Now, I want to assure you what we're not going to be talking about today is how great and cool AI is. Dan, do you think AI is pretty great and cool?
I think it's on the way to getting there.
Well, we're also not going to be talking about the technical ways to implement Gen AI into your application. So, just to give you a recap of this webinar. Now, before we get started, what is this thing generative AI that we keep talking about? Well, just like everyone in the neighborhood today, I also asked ChatGPT to explain it to me. Said, "Hey, explain generative AI to me in one sentence with an example." And the answer that ChatGPT came back to me was generative AI produces new content by learning from existing data, like creating a new song after analyzing a collection of existing songs. And what you really need to get from this is Gen AI produces these type of new content or new data from the set of existing data. And the key parts of it is the fact that it's really based on what you've already trained it on, like the existing data, and the new data, which can be variants of based on like how random you want it to be or how generative you want it to be. Now, some of the common generative AI apps that you might have seen out there or you might have used are ChatGPT, like we all know. Then there's also Anthropic, Gemini, Hugging Face, and so many more generative AI tools out there where you can just chat with a chatbot, just like I've done over here. There's also use case specific tools that we're seeing getting more common because as much as I love chatting with a chatbot, if it's not useful to me, and we'll learn more about this in today's content, is that if it's not useful to me in a task or a workflow that I'm going through, it's not really useful. And I'm not really wanting to chat with a chatbot all the time. So that's why you can see Notion AI, Copy AI, Jasper, even CKEditor kind of integrated into the workflow for their end user to be able to naturally use generative AI. Dan, what's your favorite tool for generative AI?
I have I use Copy AI a fair amount, and I really
Mhm.
like it for its ability to take unstructured content and turn it into something structured. Or it's also really good at giving me various versions of something I've written so that I can kind of Mr. Potato Head the final copy by looking at a bunch of ideas I didn't have to come up with.
Very cool. Now, the average time taken for generative AI, they say, has decreased by 40%. And the reason this is really important is a lot of people are saying, okay, Gen AI is really cool. As Dan says, he uses Copy AI to sort of minimize his task load. And that's kind of why people are using generative AI today. There's actually this Science Magazine article that says there's experimental evidence on the productivity effects of generative AI. The average time taken decreased by 40%. That's incredible. Would you say your average time when you use Copy AI has decreased by 40% or 20%, Dan?
Yeah, it's hard to really quantify, but like if there was like a frustration metric, certainly frustration's much higher looking at a blank piece of paper trying to come up with ideas. But having the freedom to just write in a rough fashion and hand copy AI or some other generative tool the idea of what I've written or the concept and have it do riffs on it has been, like I say, it's hard to quantify how much time these things should take, but I feel like the end product does come a lot faster. And I'm a lot happier looking at ideas than I am struggling over which word to put where.
Right. So the and that's where it kind of comes into the concept of increasing output quality, right? It's not only about like how much faster you're going, as you said, it's also about you figuring out what to put where, and the output quality itself has increased because of generative AI. Because there is a net it's kind of what spell check did to content creation, I would say like 20 years ago. Would you agree?
Yeah, spell check is another tool for me that really eased my workload because I'll just write the whole sentence and then go back and fix the squigglies instead of stopping and hitting backspace and losing my train of thought. And not only from a time perspective, but also from a flow perspective, I find that spell check and generative AI keep me in my flow state a little longer, allowing me to be more productive.
That is extremely true.
And you know what
So
it's also super good at is finding arcane things that I've forgotten. For example, I had to write an XPath expression a couple of weeks ago for a screen scraper, and
mhm,
I don't have my 2007 version of XPath books any longer for obvious reasons. And I'm like, what is the weird syntax here? And I asked ChatGPT to make a XPath expression, and it spit out a rather elegant one, and I moved right along with my process.
that is actually incredible. That's incredible that you've used it for XPath or equations as well. I've never used that before, but I should try it. I've always been hesitant to use ChatGPT. I'm more on the skeptical side for any kind of coding purposes, but
Mhm.
yeah,
That's a good place to be, honestly, because it's you that has to maintain it. But for something as cheap as XPath, it was
yeah.
super helpful.
That is amazing. That's actually incredible to hear. So, syntactical things, maybe ChatGPT is great. And hey, it increased your average time definitely by more than 40% if you quickly got it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, the next part of this is now you know why generative AI is so valuable to your users, but it's also really important to understand that your traditional user segment might not necessarily apply to your AI user segment. So, come up with this Mrina AI scale, as Dan likes to call it. And it's the scale of saying where your users are, like who your users are, and where are they on the scale. So the scale is just simply 1 through 4, 4 segments of users. And we have the first set of users who've just never heard of AI before. Then we have the second segment of users who might have heard of AI. They've definitely heard of ChatGPT, but they don't really trust it. They know it's fun, but they don't really trust it. And then there's this third segment who have fun with it, like who use ChatGPT for fun, like write a poem, write a haiku, maybe send me back even like an expat thing like Dan. But you're not sure how to fully get value out of it. And then the fourth type of user are the AI ninjas. These people are truly experts at what they're doing, right? They know exactly how to use your large language models. But what we should know about all of these users by now is that the AI ninjas are probably a very small fraction of the large group of users out there. And most of your users probably fall in one of these first three categories, if not the first two, who've never heard of AI or have heard of AI but cannot trust it, especially when they're working for serious purposes. And let's keep this in mind as we move on to the next one, right? So, as I promised, we are definitely going to be talking about the 6 challenges that your users are going to face while adding or interacting with AI, while your developers are going to face while adding AI into their applications, and your users might also face when you're developing for them. The number one challenge that developers face is that most people can't write good prompts. Why do I know this? And the reason I know this is because there's a really amazing LinkedIn article which I've linked over here, and Nielsen Norman, who's this huge researcher, has actually come up with research saying that only 20% of the English speaking world can actually write good prompts. And that is all great. 20% seems like a huge number, but you need to remember that means that 80% of people actually can't write good prompts. I would say I'm also guilty as one of them. There's several times where I've been frustrated with ChatGPT. I'm just asking it a very simple question, asking it a clarification for something or rewrite, and then it just adds a whole slew of context for it. And even I wouldn't say I'm one of those 20% who can write good prompts. Dan, have you ever faced any sort of issues writing good prompts?
Yeah, in fact, going back to the Mrina scale, like I remember being like an AI agnostic, and then I turned into an AI doubter, mostly because I just wasn't writing the right prompts and I had the wrong expectations. I have a feeling we'll have some examples coming up that might help illustrate that. But the more competent I got writing prompts, the better the output I got from the AI engine. Uh, it would deliver more like what I was saying. In fact, it's pretty interesting. We assume people know what we mean, and then having a machine try to interpret what we mean and give you something back can be a bit humbling or frustrating, or sort of dispel the fact these AI tools aren't really magic. They're just assembling bits based off of very specific instructions. So I
No,
would say prompt wise, I've gotten a lot better, mostly because I'm now willing to write a lot more and be defensive around the prompts, including telling it what not to do.
that is a really cool statement. Telling prompts what not to do. And then in the upcoming few slides, we're going to actually explore what CKEditor prompts actually look like. And a lot of which you'll notice is going to be simply, hey, don't do this when you're spitting out the answer for this specific prompt. And I think it took a lot of iterations for even CKEditor to sort of come around and say, these are our set of pre-written prompts. But I'm going to get into that, right? So we know that 80% can't write good prompts. Dan, who's, our senior product marketing manager, very experienced developer, has also struggled with writing prompts. And I'm pretty novice, but I've also struggled with writing prompts. And just between the two of us and this Nielsen's data, we know this is pretty hard. So what does that mean for CKEditor? We're going back to the scale, right? If people can write really good prompts, that means they're AI ninjas and they would like to have more freedom. There's more skills needed to write these good prompts, but they would like to have the freedom to write good prompts. And then there's also the other spectrum of people who've never heard of AI and don't know how to really use it. So we had to address both sets of users because most likely most content creators are going to be at both sides of the spectrum. So for those AI ninjas, what we did was came up with this AI assistant that you can write your own custom prompt, just like ChatGPT, in this AI dialog box over here. Hit enter, and then it will just populate a draft of an email for you. I recently gave a talk at JupilCon, and this is sort of a screenshot from that. Pretty cool. If you're an AI ninja, that works well for you, and you can be on your way. As Dan said, you can keep iterating, tell it exactly what you want, and be on your merry way. But let's say you're not an AI ninja. Then what is the solution? We say, hey, meet your users where they're at, give them pre engineered prompts. And what that really means is make it simple. Have a simple drop down box with specific pre written prompts like improve writing, make this shorter, make it longer, simplify language, things that anyone who's not heard of AI but wants to do with their content think they can do it because they know exactly what simplify language, make it longer, make it shorter means out of the box. And that is the value of these sort of pre written prompts with this drop down dialog. So, what does this pre written prompt look like? Behind the scenes, to your user, all they see is improve writing, right? And that's good enough for them. But behind the scenes, what you're sending to OpenAI is something like this: fix spelling mistakes, use proper grammar, and apply good writing practices. Do not lose the original meaning. You must keep the text formatting, and this is the context. So, this is the specific editor context that you're selecting and applying improved writing on. For example, here it's editor content, but it could be an actual paragraph of an email. And that's it. Very simply, you're saying these are the three or four steps that you need to do. And as Dan mentioned, there's also things you don't need to do, which is don't lose the original meaning and please keep the text formatting, right? Don't change heading 1 to heading 4. So some of the basics that you need to do. Dan,
I'm
let's
sure we could have a nice blooper reel over all the interesting things it generated before someone thought don't lose the original meaning was an essential part of the prompt. I think I remember a presentation you gave where it invented a new founder for CKEditor.
Yes. Yes, that was one of my early presentations. I feel like so this is a big loophole, especially in GPT 3.5 models. Anyone can actually go ahead and try it now. Even if you go and say CK Editor or Apple founders, if you say who were the three Apple founders, we all know there were two: Wozniak and Jobs, but it will, because it's a generative AI, it might generate and say, hey, this third founder is Steve Apple or something like that, just to stay with the standard of Steve, Steven, Steve. So generative AI is definitely not perfect. And sometimes you do need to have the edge cases of what you want it to do, but also what you don't want it to do. And in that case, you might say, hey, I want you to be factual. And if it doesn't exist, please say it doesn't exist. Yeah. So let's walk through a quick exercise of what these sort of prompts might look like. Um, so let's go through clarify sentence. Dan, what do you think clarify sentence looks like behind the scenes for Secret Editor?
I would assume we would want to remove unnecessary or persuasive words and keep the original meaning.
Nice. Remove unnecessary persuasive words and keep original meaning. Simple enough, right? That's what clarify sentence is. Now, the CK editor prompt behind the scenes says, well, you're 50% there, Dan. It does say clarify it while retaining its original meaning. But the first part is the text seems complex or ambiguous. So it's kind of giving GPT this context of this text is already complex. We want you to simplify it. That's kind of what clarify sentence, or you want you to clarify it. The other one is formalized language. That's another pretty popular pre-written prompt. What do you think that looks like, Dan?
I would want to tell the GPT to frame the content for a given audience, like maybe education level or industry, and remove colloquialisms or slang.
Okay, frame it for a specific industry, remove colloquialisms or slang. And in this case, it we do in a sense, we do say, hey, rewrite it in a formal tone, but the text appears to be written in a formal style. It looks like after many iterations, the best prompt for sort of clarifying sentence or formalizing languages actually involves giving GPT the context that it appears to be a certain way or seems to be complex, and then clarifying your instruction. So that's kind of the approach we took. But as Dan said, there's so many different ways in which you can write this prompt. You need to test it and really understand what works best for your users.
Yeah, and if you notice, like the way I tend to write prompts is very command declarative, and the way this is, it's almost like you're really talking to a person by saying the text seems complex or ambiguous. Like, I don't know if I would have thought of approaching it in quite that way. I can't wait to try it and see what results I get. If I can add less words in my prompts, I want to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think talking to a person does make a difference. I have played around with it. GPT also, like the tone with which it responds to you if you talk to it as if you're a human being, is very different. It's a lot more kinder to you too.
That's nice. My AI probably thinks I'm a little bossy.
Mom, I certainly don't think so. You're a great colleague. So, challenge number two: if we all know anything about generative AI, the number one thing that the memes out there on Twitter, on Reddit, many news worthy things are the fact that generative AI hallucinates. And that also means that the responses for Gen AI are wildly unpredictable. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, I have my own example where I'm a dog owner and I love my dog. So I wanted GPT to write a blog about dogs. So the first prompt, I just said, hey, write a blog about dogs. That's what it generated, a title, some paragraphs. Look great. Now, I said the same thing again to the same model, same editor assistant, and it just spit out a few sentences and started in almost the middle of a blog rather than like the introduction. And it was just not a blog, right? It's just a few sentences. Crazy how the same exact prompt can give me two completely different responses. Now, while this is also unpredictable, there's another example that I think Dan would love to share about how responses can be incredibly unpredictable.
Yes, indeed. So we had a need to take new headshots at the company, and I really liked the headshot that I had. The problem is the service we were getting the headshots from wanted a torso and space around the side. And I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get ChatGPT to fix this for me. And so I wrote, change this photo so you can see the arms and torso as well. And I think it thought that I should be a part Minecraft character because, as you can see on the right, this was the helpful torso and arms that it added. So naturally, I had to take a new headshot. Thank you, ChatGPT.
That is incredible. That's actually really funny to see that. When Dan first showed me, I was appalled but laughing just because I did not expect ChatGPT to say, yeah, a torso just looks like a bunch of green blocks, and that's all I'm going to try.
And perhaps I should have given it a different prompt, but I really don't know what else I would say to get the result that I wanted. Like, should I get into my arm being 92.7 millimeters if that's actually a real measurement? I don't know. So I just had to punt on this one.
Yeah. And how do you translate millimeters to pixels?
You
That,
got me.
yeah. So, because responses are wildly unpredictable, as we saw in both Dan's case of an image as well as my case of writing a blog, we've come up with a solution, which is test and refine on an ongoing basis and look at your usage logs. As a developer, you have access to how your users, especially with CKEditor, you have complete access to your usage logs and the API key that you provide. So you should be able to look at how your users are using it and what responses they're getting. And you should be able to write an initial set of prompts, test it across a variety of use cases, images and words alike, and refine based on user feedback and iterate constantly. And in the case of the blog, I do believe that if I had given a few more parameters, it might have written a blog that's exactly what I wanted and needed at that time. But in Dan's case, another thing that's really important to remember is sometimes your specific AI, like a general GPT, might not be capable of everything you wanted to do with just a prompt. It might need more assistant, or you might need to use a very use case specific tool like Canva. So it's important to realize that there are still limitations for AI, but the very first step is you need to constantly test and refine your prompt to really make sure that your responses are not wildly unpredictable, especially those pre written prompts, because you want them to be consistent for your users.
And this is probably a good time to call out that developers are very used to, A equals B always, and the system does it the same way every time. But the variability and randomness in these AI tools, it can be unexpected and even frustrating at times. But, going back to our earlier points, you get better results when you deliver better prompts.
Absolutely. And it's almost the fundamentals of how we interact with generative AI today. So prompt engineering, as they call it, is very key and very important, especially if you're adding in generative AI into your applications. So challenge number 3 that you might face while integrating AI into your applications is response formatting is inconsistent. We saw that responses can be unpredictable, but the formatting can also be quite inconsistent. Especially imagine using something like a rich text editor, right? Where there is very specific formattings like heading 1, heading 2, ordered lists, unordered lists. It's basically HTML in the back end, and you want the formatting to be consistent if you're asking for a blog. So here I have an example where I slightly, ever so slightly, changed the prompt, but I still wanted a response about the benefits of exercise. And in my head, when I just ask, write about the benefits of exercise, I'm expecting a blog post in both situations. But as you can see in the first dialog box, when I asked, write about the benefits of exercise, it gave me a blog post. This is what I expected. The second time, I changed the prompt slightly. I just changed the sentence the other way around. And it gave me this sort of motivational quote that I was not expecting. So this is not the exact format which I wanted this prompt to be in. And the solution for this is, as Dan said, it needs to be a slightly, ever so slightly instructional. So we have this thing for almost like a pre-prompt prompt, which is saying no matter what this instruction set is, the instruction is what we already saw earlier, right? Whatever the prompt for improve writing, simplify language, formalize language, clarify sentence was. But before the instruction, I'm going to give you a set of restrictions within which you need to generate this content. So execute the instruction and use the context, which is the provided HTML content, and follow the instruction closely. Don't just go wild off of it, right? If I ask you to write about something, truly write about it. Your answer must be properly formatted in HTML code. This is important for us as rich text editors because the ultimate end result is going to be in HTML. So you want it to be properly formatted. Then we say, hey, don't add any additional remarks or notes. And then finally, we're actually giving this parameter of don't act like a chatbot or a real person. And I think this is incredibly restrictive in the sense that we're giving it certain parameters that what it can and cannot do to really have a better understanding and better consistency. And believe it or not, after that, if you see the prompt executed, this previous slide, right about the benefits of exercise, was consistently spitting out something very similar to what's on the left of the screen, which is a blog rather than a motivational quote. Dan, have you ever faced something like this where the response formatting has just been completely bizarre?
Yeah, and there was one time I was getting results in tabular data and it was awesome. I could just copy and paste it right in Excel over and over and over again. And then it started spitting out the same exact prompt in like a narrative form. And I'm like, put this in a tabular format. So it put some of it there and some of it in narrative form. And I thought, I don't know if my chatbot is annoyed with me, but I'm certainly annoyed with it because I didn't know how to explain exactly what I wanted it to do. I just wanted it to keep doing what it was doing. We had a good thing going.
Yeah, no, I had to a similar experience where I was doing this almost not technical documentation, but just writing up the README for a repo, and it was going well, and it was responding in Markdown for the longest time, and then suddenly it just spit out plain text. And I was like, nope, we already specified at the start of this conversation that I wanted it in Markdown. Sometimes it's also important to reiterate it, this response formatting in every single prompt. And while it might seem like a little bit of a hassle, it's just kind of the state of generative AI today.
Unlike my teenager, the chatbots never said, "Yeah, Dad, you told me."
Well, hey, I don't think the memory updated function is really working sometimes with the ChatGPT. All right. So the solution, if your response formatting is inconsistent for your users, specify your output format in detail and make sure you do it in every single prompt. And that's why part of all of our prompts kind of has this sort of precursor dictating what your chatbot can and cannot do. Now, the fourth big challenge that we don't see coming, especially as developers, is errors don't make sense to users. You really think about it. A typical API error might look something like this, right? I'm not saying OpenAI doesn't have amazing error handling. They do respond, they do have error responses. If you provide an incorrect API key, it's going to show you something like this. If you provide, too long of a context window, it's going to return something like this, saying the context length is 4,097 tokens, or length is 4,097 tokens, but the message resulted in 9,487 tokens. But your end user might not know what this means, especially think about those in the first two segments of that AI scale, right? If they've never heard of AI or they kind of know of AI but are skeptical about it, they see some error messages like this that just absolutely doesn't make sense or is unhelpful to them. um, they're going to stop using it. So instead, the solution here is really just contextualize this for them, tell them what's going on. The better notification for this is saying, hey, we've encountered an error with the AI engine. Our team has been notified. We'll look into it immediately. Try again shortly. Here's the support email, right? And this is not telling them the API key was incorrect or something else happened with your connection to the LLM. It's just saying, hey, try again in a little bit. We're on it. Really reassuring your users. This is some regular practice that you should already be doing in your applications. But very specifically for situations like this, make sure you're doing that. And then the other one is context length. I also don't understand what 4,000 plus tokens is or what 9,487 tokens are. Off the top of my head, if I had some sort of conversion metrics, maybe I would understand that. But I just don't, out of context, understand that. As a everyday user, I would rather know things in terms of words or characters. So this might be a very simple change in just saying, hey, looks like you've entered something too long. Try shortening it. And this really helps because imagine if someone's editing a giant article in your editor or a giant blog post, they know not to add the entire context window of that giant article. Maybe they'll split it into a few pieces and really focus on those specific pieces. And that actually might just improve their response as a whole rather than having generative AI kind of apply to an entire article.
Yeah, and one
Dan,
nice little tip to think about is when you're encapsulating the error messages, make sure to put in there, like, what should the user do? What's their next step when this error occurs? Because if you think about it, like, this is a black box to them. They have no idea what's going on under the hood. They expect to put in something, get something back out. Like saying, try again in a little while, that can help, which means, hey, you're going to keep getting this until you don't, or you can contact us. Like that gives the user some sort of reassurance that it's going to get better, or there's an action they can take to remedy this. So that's a helpful thing to think about is when the error occurs, what is the user's next logical step or steps?
yeah. And sometimes it might just be they need to wait for a little bit, right? If you've run out of tokens, sometimes you hit rate limits. So they won't understand what a rate limiting error is. You might just have to say, hey, try again after a little bit, and you should be able to use this. So really understanding all of the different use cases is very valuable, and understanding your user's workflow you can in this sense of errors can also be extremely useful. There's a fifth challenge that is it's probably more high level, these last two challenges, which is there's no standardized UI for AI. When CKEditor set out to do this, you know, there's no like standardized, like this is how you use generative AI in your web application, or this is how you use it in the context of a rich text editor. Like we all know how ChatGPT interfaces, but that doesn't mean a rich text editor necessarily interfaces like that. In fact, if you look around at all of the different types of applications for generative AI, Google does something like this, where right after your Google search, you get a bunch of pre written prompts on the bottom, and then you get a pre written response from generative AI in the top, and then all of your search results. Cool. But then if I look at GitHub Copilot, it does something like this. You literally have a side chatbot with you as you're programming, almost like a pair programming AI right into your Visual Studio Code. That is very different from Google's UI for AI. Look at Canva. there's just a bunch of buttons with some pre-written prompts and one custom dialog box where you can say exactly what you want it to generate, right? You don't even get a chance to pick your LLMs like Copilot. Um, and then you go to Jasper Chat, and it's a completely different interface. You give some an outline of exactly what you wanted to write about, and then you get a blog about that. Very different. And then there's so many more examples. But if there's one thing you could see across all of these examples, there's no standardized UI. And the solution to address this problem is that you need to understand your user's workflow and really build the AI in rather than bolting it on. The reason the Canva AI is so popular is because you know that as I'm editing a specific design, I can automatically pick and choose where I want the AI to apply a new generative design for me. But the reason CKEditor's AI works so well is because it's built right into the editor rather than bolted it on just as a side chatbot. It's right in the editor. You can select specific prompts and paragraphs and have these pre-written prompts show up just like spell check or accessibility checker would show up. And so finally, just don't add a chat box and call it done for generative AI. Really understand your user's workflow. There have been apps where I've seen we have generative AI and it's a chatbot on the side. While that's cool, trust me, it's not that helpful. Dan, have you ever encountered an experience where you're simply using a chatbot?
I went to Europe and my bag got lost somehow. That happens. And there was a sign at the airport that says, "Don't waste your time, just fill in this form." And I slept like 1 hour overnight. So I'm like, I'll just take a picture of this form and fill it out at my nice, comfy hotel. Well, there was some code I needed and couldn't get back in the airport. And I really didn't know what to do. And KLM had a chat bot that you could use. And in desperation, I tried it. And it was able to look at my ticket, understand what I was trying to do, find this little weird little code that I needed very quickly with no wait time, and then wish me a great day. So I found that to be super helpful.
That is actually an incredible use case for a chatbot. Do you think it would have been even more helpful if the AI would have just prompted, like, understand that your baggage didn't reach its destination, and it sort of asked you if you wanted to do all of these steps rather than you having to chat with a bot?
That would have been sweet. I think at the time I was just happy not to wait in a 30-minute queue hoping to talk in a language I didn't know. But yeah, I mean, it should know, right? It should know
Yeah,
these things. The
because
system knows it somehow.
exactly, like bags are tracked these days. And even to go back to your example, while that is great, I would say a even better user flow would be build it right into that application, right? We know if a bag reached its final destination, if someone picked it up. And if someone didn't, send them a notification saying, "Hey, do you want help with this? And let me help you through the process." That's incredible. That's proactive and really going into the passenger's travel workflow, right? So that would be kind of my take on that is while the chatbot is helpful, I think we can do even more with it.
True. That's a good point.
Awesome. So challenge number 6. Now, everyone's doing it, right? Everyone in the industry, everyone in the neighborhood has generative AI in their application, and it's really hard to stand out. In fact, when I'm saying everyone is doing it, this is a few of the screenshots where I've just taken it from HubSpot, Adobe, Asana, every single person you turn around. Slack even has generative AI where I can summarize my entire channel and get a summary of what's going on, right? I don't even have to read my Slack channels anymore. Just what did I miss out today? And how do you really stand out? And the answer comes back to, well, if you want to make it a really useful AI, then think about how to add value to your users. It's not just a checkbox on your feature page. Well, that might be great. I don't know how many people are actually using it. The best the best sort of AI out there is something that's going to last beyond this craze of generative AI, because the craze is going to die down, but your business is going to stay around, and you want to make sure that whatever solution you come up with is really helpful to your users. And at CKEditor, just like spell check and accessibility checker, we truly believe the AI assistant is going to do exactly that for the content creation, which is just enhance it and act like an assistant, a peer writer or reviewer as they're writing a piece of content. And that's why we added generative AI, and that's why we believe will stand out. But curious to see how most people are thinking about standing out and going beyond this idea of just a chatbot or a checkbox on a feature page.
You raise a good point. Like as the maturity of AI continues to grow, I think what we're going to see is companies are going to become very sensitive to their IP ending up in these large language models, and they're going to want to put IT governance and process and standards in place. And what I really like about our AI assistant is we're not telling you which AI engine you should use. Like that choice is left to you. We'll support them all. Bedrock, ChatGPT, your custom model. Where we shine is helping you encapsulate great prompts, give those to the user in the interface that they're using, and letting that interact back and forth with the content to really make an optimized workflow. And I think that's uses the best of sort of our position in your application without sort of overstepping or preventing sort of dark patterns or dead ends where, let's say you start using a chat tool and then your company says, as of now, the only chat tool we're going to use is this one. And what do? Like with what we do, you just reconfigure and map your prompts and you're good to go. So you can sort of stay up with the twists and turns of AI maturity and still deliver good value to your users.
That is an excellent point, Dan, and one that I think a lot of people sometimes forget is, while OpenAI is the big name these days, we have so many other LLMs coming out and so many other models. And sometimes, even if they're not public models, there might be private models that you might self host, and you might want to connect to using an API. And if you have a private Azure AI enterprise model, it would be so much better to have this sort of AI agnostic, AI agnostic solution rather than a vendor or CK editor like AI assistant that really locks you into your AI. I think that's the value that I've seen even with coding assistants, right? Let alone writing assistants, even coding assistants. When I'm able to choose which large language model I want to use, um, I'm also able to choose how that delivers in terms of like my specific code and fixing the errors. Like I personally sometimes prefer Anthropic's models in terms of like explaining documentation to me and things like that. So I really think even your users would be empowered. There might be a large language model that a large majority of your users might benefit for more than even just like what is industry standard today, because this sort of space is rapidly changing, and it's absolutely important to consider that what is true today is not going to be true 6 months from now.
Yeah, you said that right. And I think, going back to the other thing you sort of brushed upon, like it would be better for us if we could like push our content into the model so that it could build stuff based off of what it knows about us. And going back to the example about it inventing a founder of CK, like if we gave it its body of knowledge, it wouldn't do that. And you could trust it more. Or you could
Exactly.
have it write according to your voice or your tone, or like suggest product features because it would know these things. Right now, I feel like it's up to us to populate the context in the prompts, and it only will accept so much content. So it can only be so good. But it's not going to be that way for long. The industry evolves rapidly.
Yeah, embeddings are already becoming a huge thing, and I can only imagine that in the future, people are going to add even more embeddings around their LLMs to provide this additional context that you can't just provide in a general context window. And context windows are also increasing today, so it's definitely going to be changing, and I'm excited to see how this sort of evolves and what kind of standards come around from it. So if you have not been paying attention for the past 45 minutes, what we've been talking about, and you really just want to know the challenges that we faced at CKEditor, here are the 6 challenges, right? Most people can't write good prompts. The responses, as you remember with Dan's headshot becoming half a headshot and half of something from Minecraft, responses are just wildly unpredictable. Sometimes response formatting is inconsistent. Once I got a motivational quote, and then the other time I got a blog post. Errors sometimes cannot make sense to users. Remember, if you tell a user that they don't have a valid API key, well, they're going to look at you and say, "So what do I do now?" And there's no standardized UI for AI, and everyone's doing it. And how do you stand out? Well, the solutions and the lessons that we learned from this was if they can't write good prompts, start with giving them a set of pre written prompts. It will really enhance their user experience. If the responses are wildly unpredictable, test and refine on an ongoing basis, right? Keep testing the prompts, and sometimes you are going to hit limitations, like the example with Dan, that it might just not be possible for that model. But most times you should be able to iterate enough to get to a decent solution that works well for you and your user. If it's inconsistent, make sure that you specify what you want in your output format and make sure you repeat that, right? Maybe it's like talking to a 5-year-old. You need to repeat it multiple times to make sure they really understand that this is the kind of formatting you want. And that's kind of what you need to do with GPT. The errors don't make sense, contextualize the errors, tell them what to do next, as Dan mentioned. Don't just leave them hanging, right? These are your users. It's really valuable that they gain trust in this AI and they know that if there is an error, you're on top of it to fix it. And there's no standardized UI for AI, so make sure you just plug it into your user's workflow. That's the best way to really provide value. A chatbot is great. And as Dan said, it can work amazing, but just imagine the value you can add to your users if it was more than a chatbot. And if everyone's doing it, it's going to be hard to stand out, but you need to add value at the end of the day for your users to buy into this AI assistant. Any questions?
Here's a question. What advice would you give to a company that isn't sure which large language model to start with?
What advice would you give to a company who isn't sure which large language model to start with? I would say you have to first start with what are the requirements in terms of regulatory governmental requirements for your company. That's probably the number one place to start with. Not all large language models are compliant to all regulations. The second step would be then to see what your users are compliant with. So, do you need a HIPAA compliant LLM? And if so, that already automatically eliminates a lot of the other LLMs out there. And finally, if it's your own enterprise, looking for an enterprise solution would be a great idea. If you have intellectual property, you might want to self host this LLM so it's not shared publicly. Like anything that you put into this LLM should not be used as training for, you know, your for the public large language model. It's better to kind of have your own self-hosted language model. Those are the first places to start. I'm not a large language model expert. I would highly recommend going to each of these individual websites, whether it's OpenAI, Azure, AWS Bedrock, or if you want something open source like Hugging Face and really evaluating these models. There's several ways and evaluation metrics out there that I would start with. But
Another question. What's been your experience getting code generated?
So CKEditor is not a code generation AI assistant. It's a writing assistant. So in CKEditor's experience, I don't believe we generate code. I actually know we don't generate code, but I've definitely used Copilot, Cody Search, things like that. It's not perfect. I think it's great for if you have a huge documentation that you're looking through, you just want a few answers. It's great to do that. I personally, and it's great to find bugs in your code. If you don't understand why something is erroring out, taking a screenshot, taking the bug, and then just putting it into the LLM works. But I've never been successful with the AI just building an app from scratch. it's very hallucinative and
Yeah, I
important.
think that would be my biggest fear. Like, I don't write a lot of code anymore. That XPath that I said I generated is about the only thing I've ever asked AI to do. And now it did a good job of it, and it was exactly what I needed and saved me from fiddling around. So I love that. But, my experience with having it write stuff is the more it writes, the more it sort of drifts and gets crazy. And, unlike a blog post, if you generate your application and it breaks in the middle of the night, you're the one trying to figure it out. And I'm old enough to remember when WYSIWYG was like Dreamweaver, and it would, and Front Page, remember those things? And they would
Yes.
generate all this horrendous HTML that looked fine until you had to edit it. And then you're like, what is all this? And so, I don't know where the code generation tools are, but I think, for limited cases, a function here, a function there, maybe it can break a function into two functions for you, but I certainly wouldn't ask it to do a whole heck of a lot that isn't boilerplate. Make
I
me nervous.
No, I would agree, because the last thing you need is to be debugging a whole slew of like generated code. And not, if it's not your own code, you're not going to also understand where the bugs are. So
Another question, what's your experience between ChatGPT, Anthropic, and Bedrock, if you have any? I personally have only used ChatGPT and whatever's hidden in other tools, so I can't be too helpful here.
ChatGPT, sorry, Anthropic.
Yeah, and Bedrock, I think is what they said. Yeah.
Okay, so GPT, well, just to clarify, AWS Bedrock uses Anthropic behind the scenes. So the
Mhm.
LLM that's used in AWS Bedrock is essentially just Anthropic's large language model. So like Claude Sonnet, Claude Opus, all of that. GPT, of course, uses 3.5 and 4. Depends on what you're comparing and what the comparison is for. So if you're comparing, let's say, the newest model, which I think is the Sonnet model with GPT 4.0, there's been a lot of case studies where I personally have found Anthropic to write a lot better, but GPT to give me more valuable responses. That has just been my experience of it. I think Anthropic writes beautifully. Like, it can adjust to the tone. If I give it it has a larger context window. So I think it really makes a difference. And then the cheapest model, I believe, is 3.5, and of all of them out there, and it does a pretty good job. So the other thing you really need to think about when you're evaluating all these models is, what kind of tasks is this model doing for your end users, and how expensive of a model do you want? Because AI is pretty expensive these days, and it can add up. It can really add up. So, making sure you're tracking your usage logs and looking at the pricing for every request, and knowing that, hey, I get 5,000 users a day, who potentially, if all 5,000 users are, let's say they all click around 10 times, that is about 50,000 API calls. What is that cost going to look like for me per day? What is that cost going to look like for me per month and per year? And just really planning out for that use case when you're evaluating between these models is a good thing. So I don't know if I really answered that question, but in my view, I think writing Anthropic, value GPT, and if you want something cheap and very useful and gets the job done, 3.5 is great.
I think to kind of tag on to that, you mentioned the usage fees adding up and more people chat. This is a really good reason to build good prompts. And
Yep,
the reason why you should encapsulate a good prompt for your user, because they'll make less calls and it'll cost your business less money.
absolutely. And maybe there's ways which you can kind of go around it by limiting the number of calls they can make, having different types of premium plans to sort of pay off that. But just know that the more calls you're going to make, the more you're going to get charged.
Another question, is there any place you'd recommend people learn more about writing good prompts?
Ooh, I do have a few recommendations of articles. I'll be making a tweet later. CKEditor will be making a tweet. We'll add some of the resources after that, as well as publish them on the slides publicly as well.
Yeah, I've had a couple of folks on LinkedIn that I don't know publish like a one pager with prompt advice. I don't know if I can share those because they're not mine, but they were sort of helpful to kind of see what a good one looks like. seeing one of those really helped me understand that when I'm writing a prompt, it's helpful to tell the chat what to act like act like a developer. Write about this feature. Here's the feature content. Use no persuasive or emotional words. Only stick to the provided context. Like, I didn't think I had to explain all that, much like I didn't think I had to explain what a torso and arms would look like. But
No,
seeing some examples and playing with it really helped me understand like how to get more of what I wanted.
that very true, Dan. As I said, like, yeah, these are probably not my resources. Again, not an AI ninja here speaking, but definitely an AI user. And I would say I've just done it with repetition, right? Going through the cycle of these are my templated prompts for these purposes. Even you as a user, like if you're using AI on the regular, just understanding why you're using it, what are you using it for, and having some preset templates. There are several out there. A lot of them are free. If you go to GitHub, I've seen a lot of developers post sort of prompt databases where you have some starter templates to just get started. But I don't think it's perfect yet. The science of prompt engineering is not perfect because the LLMs change so much. And I've also noticed that prompts that worked for 3.5 sometimes doesn't GPT 3.5 doesn't necessarily work for 4.0. So those are also things to keep in mind.
Yeah, it looks like we're coming up on the hour here. I really appreciate everybody who registered and tuned in. We'll make the recording available later. So if you missed some of this or want to hear parts of it again, it'll be available. And if you're interested in playing around with the CKEditor AI assistant, highly recommend you grab a trial from the website. Our technical team recently introduced a new way to install the software and build the packages that you need. It's super slick, super helpful, and you can get up and running in mere moments. So I suggest you give that a shot and see what the AI assistant can do for you. If you don't want a trial, we have a really interesting demo on the website in the demo section. I'll let my excellent colleague here give her parting remarks. And once again, thanks for tuning in.
Awesome. Well, if you want to stay updated with all of our amazing content and work at CK Editor, also feel free to sign up for our newsletter at ckeditor.com. It's at the bottom of the page, and you can stay up to date with all of our recent AI innovations in the AI assistant world, our content innovations, as well as just the rich text editing space as a whole. Thank you so much.